When you hear the tone, you will be the 31st person to join the meeting.
Part of this comes from the fact that paper form data collection processes are rarely, if ever, replaced by forms. That's usually how it starts. There's some sort of paper forms that people are filling right now in some sort of process. They're maybe being keyed into a back end or something like that. And we say, hey, we're going to replace that. We're going to go mobile, and we're going to build a bunch of mobile forms, and we're going to replace that process with it. And again, I would argue that it's not really usually mobile forms. It's almost certainly mobile apps. The good news is that there's commonality between most or perhaps even all enterprise mobile apps. And I use the word enterprise here because I do want to distinguish between what we talk about here in the capture and display of enterprise information versus, say, Angry Birds or something like that. Certainly quite a bit of a difference there. But for what we're talking about here, there's some good commonality between quite a number of enterprise mobile apps. So let's look at it at the form level first. So a lot of people, like I said, look at something like this. They look at a PDF and they say, hey, this is a form, right? I've got this PDF. In this case, it's for some insurance application for medical plan. And I'm just going to build that. I'm going to make that, turn that into a form, and I'm gone mobile. And the good news is you can do this pretty quickly. In fact, one of our partners went to our mobility summit, took this exact form, ran it through a conversion tool and our design tool, and produced this on the iPad in 68 seconds. Right, so everything went from that PDF, and I should point out that PDF did not have fillable fields prior to that. They took this and they presented it on an iPad with fillable fields all over it, and in 68 seconds. And certainly that's the extreme case, right? I've got a mobile form deployed on a mobile device in just over a minute of time. And that's certainly the start of the story. We've presented now a mobile form from what was previously a paper form or a PDF form. But usually, that's just the start of the conversation, right? If you've got any customers out there and you've done something like that, you said, hey, I can just convert that maybe as a demo or the first pilot or something like that, that just kind of starts the conversation. Usually the next conversation is something around, let's add some validations, putting some conditionals between fields. Let's start doing some automatic filling of fields, dates and times, that sort of thing when somebody signs it. Maybe we want to automatically fill out some dates and times. Maybe we want to pre-populate some fields through a drop-down list, a potential list of people, or look up data or something like that. Then we probably want to do something with this form. We probably want to route it for some sort of approval. That almost always comes up, right? We have user 1 fill our form, then we have user 2 approve our form, the classic inspectors and managers sort of approval workflow. And then ultimately, we want to do something with the data that we've collected, export it somewhere. Oftentimes, we see this starts with, hey, let's export a PDF. It's just an image. We've collected it mobily. That's great. Now let's just, that out on a document management system or something like that. So that starts the conversation. So already, you can see that some complexity starts to get baked into the forms. But usually, even us, and certainly I'm sure quite a number of people on this call, still approach it from the forms mentality, right? So what I've got here is a couple of slides of our designer. So that same form that I had presented on the iPad before, we go through it, we customize it a bit, we add a drop-down list or pick list as we call it. We add an export, in this case for PDF, we add some validation rules, some required fields, that sort of thing. And we say, hey, we've satisfied everything we need to do, right? Or at least some methodology of what we were asked to do, and now we present it like this. Once again, I'm just going to ask anybody who's got some background noise going on to just maybe mute themselves if they can. Got them leaving everybody unmuted so that we can ask questions and collaborate when we get through a couple of the pieces of the presentation. But if you've got some noise, I appreciate it if you so this is that same form now. It's still one page. We've added a highlighted field for the requirements. We've got a red border around it to draw some people's attention to it, that there is a validation rule on it. We've got a drop-down list. So it's certainly not a piece of paper anymore, right? Because now we've actually enforced some of the logic. There's a lot of if you look up close at this, there's a lot of rule text in it that says if this field and that field and that sort of thing. But now we're enforcing some of that. So we say, hey, great, we've satisfied the needs of our customer. We've added some of that logic and some of the rules that are required to make it more than just a pretty picture of a paper form. But this usually brings us to the next conversation. So great, we've got that. We added validations, but you know what I really meant, and I'm sure people on the phone here have had this conversation with customers and partners. Really what I meant is that these options are conditional on other things, not just required fields. Maybe what's going on in the back office, what's going on the local device, the mobile device, other field data, in other words, data collected somewhere else in the field, including other people that have collected it. What the weather is like today. Some people might accuse me of putting this bullet in as a joke, but actually that can be true, right? If there's certain environmental conditions that might actually make it conditional for pieces of data that might need to be collected while we're out in the field, whether it's raining that day or sunny that day or something on a construction site, for instance. This one is here for humor, who won the most recent World Cup. That's obviously a joke, but it really, once you start thinking about it, you can make, once you've brought that form out to a mobile device, you can really make validation conditional on pretty much anything, right? And oftentimes we actually need to do that. Then also, when we said automatically fill some fields like dates and times, really what I probably meant is not just that somebody's signature date and time is pre-filled when they sign it, but I might actually have a workflow process that says within 7 days of a patient being admitted, they must go through some sort of other test or some sort of other piece of data collection. So, that could be the subtraction of dates and times. It could be the validations of dates based on field data. There's all sorts of different rules and rule sets that can go along with that. Then, of course, when we say, I want to route this form somewhere, we talked about the approval workflow before, and certainly a system like our MyForm system can do the simple case without any problem whatsoever. It's really easy to set up in a simple approval. But also what's capable in MyForms and what's usually needed in a production environment is it's much more complex in the workflow. This can be based on calculations, not just on the form itself, but ones that are maybe tangentially related. We could have a rule set that says in this particular order entry, it's dependent not just on the dollar amount that we are setting up here in this order, but what this person has done in the past or what the group of people are allowed to do, that sort of thing, right? So it's not necessarily even related to the data that we've captured on that form. And more, so then even beyond that, we start talking about maybe we need to populate it with a list of potential people, but what really I mean there is I need all patients for a given doctor with their complete medical history, and maybe even a complete drug interaction database if we're in the medical field, or of course similar sort of things over on a field inspection where we might be looking up license numbers or premises where we're going out to do an inspection, that sort of thing. We need that all available at the point of capture, both online and offline. And then, of course, we all know PDF is not really the answer when it comes to export. Certainly there are document management systems that take those, and that's helpful. But even if I'm operating inside that wall, I might have one kind of PDF that needs to go to a hospital, another one that's mailed to a patient, and I might really need to integrate to many backends. There are certainly standards out there in certain industries, but every industry's also got some unique software associated with it, unique backend systems. So really, I want, for my data to be useful anyway, I want to be able to collect it and then automatically export it to those systems. So I suggest that when we start building forms, we stop asking these questions. Almost every form design question, form design discussion that I've heard both here and elsewhere has almost some point asks these questions, like what are your constraints of fields A, B, and C? What colors does your organization use? How big do they need to be? So on and so forth. And don't get me wrong, all those details are important because forms certainly make up a part of a mobile app solution, but they're not necessarily the lead-off question. Really, the lead-off question, the one that we should probably start with, is more along the process side of things. So let's start by asking what the actual process is that's being replaced, right? There's probably a paper process, and even if it's not necessarily a standardized process, there's something being followed. So let's start the conversation there. Let's see if it's being followed by everyone, first off. And by the way, this isn't a question that you even need to think about answer, because I can tell you right now the answer is no. even in the places that do have standard procedures for doing something in a paper process, almost everywhere somebody is doing something outside the bounds of that. And that's certainly very important when we start thinking about how we would design a mobile app for data capture and data display. What's the biggest pain point in the process? This seems obvious, right?
You are now muted.
But also, what's the biggest inefficiency? And surprisingly, perhaps, these aren't necessarily the same things. A pain point in a process might be for somebody who's capturing data, but inefficiency might be on how data is being reported. We want to aim to solve all of these problems, and we want to make sure that we're handling it for all of our potential users, not just people who are on one side of that equation, on just a capture side or just a reporting side or some other portion of the organization. And then, importantly, how are we going to measure the success of a change to your mobile application process? This is really important as a vendor and as a provider of mobile application solutions. You can ask what's being replaced and describe, here's how we're going to do it, and we could produce something that's very successful and everybody's following the new process and it's all being captured mobily. And then we say, well, how successful were we in that? Can we put some metrics on that? And the answer is, well, hey, we didn't think about that early in the process. We should think about that because we want to see if we're saving people time, if we're saving people money, if we're generating new revenue, whatever the case might be. And part of this, by the way, is the answer to that might be different at different stages of the mobile application. There might be a place where it actually does take longer to capture some data because we're capturing more of it or people are being more rigorous about it, but that might save us money later in the solution because we're able to better report on that data going forward. So with this in mind, what we wanted to do is take a look at a solution that we put together. Oh, and yeah, is there a device preference, and if yes, why? And by the way, because the device is cheap is not a good answer to that question. People's time is always more important than device cost in the grand scheme of things. So let's take a look at a solution that we put together for one of our customers. This is in the alarm industry, security industry, putting together what was described as a sales order entry process. So here are a couple of the generic versions of the forms that they provided. There was an Excel spreadsheet, a couple of PDFs, that sort of thing. And here's how it seemed. An estimation sheet that all the sales reps were using. There's some amount of calculations, but this should be easy because it's already in the Excel spreadsheet that was provided. Ultimately, we need to produce a contract document directly from the estimation sheet, and we need workflow to move it around the operations department. And then ultimately export the data to two, and I'll say semi-open systems here because at least they were based on technologies that are fairly familiar in the IT world, one being on SQL Server and one just being through a customized set of web services. And this is what it looked like, right? This is a forms problem. We've probably all seen this. We've got a form or a couple of forms here, and we're going to solve it as a forms problem. And that's what we started out as well. And make no mistake, this was a learning experience for us and certainly has played into some of the things that we have built to try to make the whole process easier. And then there were about 10 other miscellaneous forms that collected some customer data, but those, at least in appearances, didn't prove to be the hard part. So, great. Let's start with the estimation sheet. If anybody has designed a form, almost every form somewhere on it has a section that has customer information. This is where you're capturing a contact name, an address, a phone, et cetera, right? So you're building that. So, all right, we're building that on this estimation sheet. However, right away we discovered that there's some differences here, right? So is it a residential customer or is it a business customer? That matters because of simple things even. Are we capturing first and last name? Are we capturing business name? We certainly don't want two sections of a form or two whole forms to have to be able to distinguish between these different types of customers. So now we're building some logic already in what will ultimately end up being an app to make sure that we're collecting the correct kind of information there. And then, of course, are they a new customer or an existing customer? Certainly a business that's been in business as long as they have has a very robust customer base. So we are probably going to be going back to them and performing sales again. So we need to know, how to do that lookup, and then if we are doing that lookup, are we allowed to change details about that customer? And then remember, this is in 2 different systems, and some of the customer number information and that sort of stuff varies between those. And we might have actually data inconsistencies between those 2 backend systems because remember, previously this is all coming in kind of from a paper transcription process. But nonetheless, the flow looks straightforward, and so it was for us. And we put together in one of our kind of HTML formatted forms just a standard customer information capture screen, and we were good to go. This works. Certainly, there's some pieces of it here that are unique to this form or unique to this app, but ultimately we were good to go. So then we start encountering our next challenge, at least a challenge from the perspective of a form. So an important part of an estimate is that a parts list needs to be estimated, right? We're going to go out, we're going to perform some action. In this case, we're going to install or change some sort of security system that exists out there in the world, and we need to know what parts we're going to use. So first off, there are a lot of parts. I didn't know much about the alarm implementation business previously, and I still don't, but I do know that there are several thousand parts that can be used and that they do change fairly frequently, and that most of them are fairly similar in naming conventions. Ultimately, we do need this to be used offline, so it can be done in a disconnected environment. We don't always necessarily have connectivity between our sales reps when they're doing estimation and the back office, although we'd like to. As I mentioned, the parts are updated frequently. And then we also want to make sure that this works not just, say, on an iPad, which is perhaps a primary platform, but we also want to make sure that it works in a web browser too, in case that we're just working through it in a browser on a desktop or something like that as well, because that's mobile collection as well. You know, cross-platform is obviously very important. And so we have parts. So this is what that ended up looking like. Still on that same sales order entry form, we see that there is, in this case, 2 parts recorded, and we have the ability to add some quantity, unit labor. We actually do some lookup based on this. And in fact, though it's not pictured here, we can enter a little bit of the part number, and it gives us a drop-down list of parts that match that, and we're good to go. And we see there's actually some calculations going on down there below that as well. Now, I am going to take a brief aside here and say the way this was built was through a very customized process, through lookups to the back-end systems that provide this information. However, this spawned a piece of our new upcoming offering in MyForms 10 and in My Enterprise apps, and that is data replication. So I want to take a brief detour into that. What we discovered both in this implementation and in other places is that there's a challenge of getting some sort of back-end data down to the mobile devices. We want to allow access to that data while it's offline, as I mentioned earlier in this parts list, but elsewhere as well. We want to keep that data fresh. In other words, we don't want the user to have to constantly sit there and refresh it in some sort of manual process. So we've, since this implementation and partially guided by this implementation, put together a solution for this. We are providing services for data administrators to utilize. We are storing the data in a centralized repository, even if we have multiple different source data. We are automatically deciding what's new for a device so that we don't have to always update the entire data set down to a mobile device, because certainly we might have network limitations where that's not feasible and certainly not desirable. We want to allow background sync, and so we have. And we want to provide common access. That is, if I know how to access this data on one platform, I need to be able to do that on another platform as well. So iOS, Windows, Android, mobile web, whatever it might be. So the high-level diagram of what we've put together kind of looks like this. You start with some sort of back-end data source or sources. So we've got SQL Server, Oracle, DB2, but it can be whatever data source it might really be. We've provided or are providing a set of data and schema services, and then ultimately that brings the data into a centralized repository. Again, even if we have multiple inbound resources, we're able to take those all and put those into a single repository. Then that repository is what's going to feed our mobile application. So we're going to move from that repository through a set of client sync services, and these are all accessed universally from any of our platforms, any of our supported platforms, iOS, Android, Windows, and they still use the same services, pull the data down, and can do that in a background context, and can do it in a kind of lightweight context so they're only getting a change set when it's appropriate. Then we're storing it into a common access library. We chose to use SQLite as its rather robust and available on all of those platforms. Then we're providing client data API to bring into our apps and into our forms. Now, this, of course, all didn't exist at the time we were handling the security systems implementation that I talked about. But if we look back now and say, hey, if we had this at the time that we were building that, would we have used it? The answer is yes. And we've seen in many of our implementations since then that we are able to use this as well, and we're starting to do so now. So this is our answer now. At the time that we were putting the solution together, we didn't have that available, so we built a more customized solution. So back to that solution, turns out once we get past the parts list, so now we've got different kinds of customers, residential and commercial, and now we've got a parts lookup that we're able to search through. We actually find out that realistically when we're estimating a job, we don't really have a single site or actually even really a single job. We need to capture multiple portions of this. So now we've taken that form and we need to kind of expand it so that it can have different site addresses. You know, we can no longer really have that single customer contact area. Portions of jobs are actually in multiple orders. So we might say that we're performing this install at this site at a given time, but that's separate from something else. So now we start bringing that into the form context, and you see now we're kind of creating quite a bit of customization into what would otherwise normally be a standard-looking form. We've got systems, we've got offerings, we've got service contracts, that sort of thing, and we're adding multiple ones there. Okay, so now we've got kind of the capture side taken care of. We're still thinking of this kind of in a forms context. It's a very complicated form, and I would argue it's really an app at this point. But now we need to route it as well. So sales guys can't necessarily approve their own sales as much as they'd like to, and I know some of the salespeople here would love to be able to approve their own sales, but realistically they can't do that. But sometimes higher-ups, if you're a COO or you're the operations manager, can do their own sales, and they can approve their own sales, right? So that kind of starts to throw an interesting wrinkle into our approval workflow. In this case, sometimes an alarm technician who's not in and of themselves normally a salesperson can trigger a sale. And then the sale approval itself is dependent on a number of factors: the size of the sale, the recurring revenue of the sale, how long it's going to take to make our money back if we're giving a discount, the pricing model, whether it's standard or not. And in fact, when we sat down and analyzed it, it looked something like this in our flow chart, right? So we see that we have now added complexity behind the form. We can still think of it as a form in a way, right, because it's this single form that's being routed around, but we've got a very complicated set of decisions going on behind it to see who gets what and when. And I know, I'm sure this is probably a hard to read slide, and trust me, it's challenging to implement a solution as well. But ultimately, we're able to provide that through our combination of our application and our forms offerings through our MyForm system. But the story is not really done once we've got the workflow. We need to see some visibility into that as well, right? It'd be great if all our sales just went through right now, but we might actually need to take some interaction with them. And so we need an add-on, we need a dashboard. So in this case, I'm only showing a single entry, but we have the ability to search based on dates, whether it's the initial upload, recent upload, only active forms versus ones that maybe have been processed in the past. We see whether they're in process, rejected, approved, self-approved orders, that sort of thing. And suddenly now what had started as a sales order entry form now has a whole separate component associated to it to provide visibility to where that form is. But eventually, we're done with that form, right? It's made it all through the workflow. We've seen it. We brought it through the dashboard. We've seen what's going on with it. But finally, we want a contract. So initially, we want our sales reps to present a contract to customers on iPad for signature. And this sounds like a good idea. In theory, certainly very modern. I can bring in my iPad out to everyone and have them sign on the dotted line, and we're good to go. But maybe we don't really want to do that, right? Because we don't want to burden our sales reps to go out into the field and necessarily have to do that. We don't want to necessarily have to visit them again. So maybe we just want to email them a link that they can come and fill it out. And then, of course, if we're doing that, we need to support a variety of different platforms. The probably most common browsers are IE, and I put IE 9 here because that's where we want compatibility back through. Chrome, Firefox, Safari, those are all fine. We want to be able to provide that ability. But then, you know, in retrospect, some of our customers might not be up to date. They might be running end-of-life machines on Windows XP, in which case we're probably running IE 8. So we need to be able to support that as well. And then it really would be nice for to have some sort of wizard step us through that, right? The reason that's interesting is because these might be people who are not necessarily familiar with technology, but we're still bringing them into our same mobile data collection system, and we want to be able to step them through in a kind of easy-to-use format. And so we built this. We built a mobile solution that they could bring out on the iPad if they needed to, but if not, they would provide it through a browser, and it's kind of what it looks like. There's a lot of previous and next buttons where a customer can step through. If they have to initial things or sign things, they can do that directly through their browser. And there you go. Now we've got the actual contract exception, contract acceptance, and then, of course, once we've done that, now we actually have to hit the tricky part of exporting data, right? This all goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. These are all pieces that we normally associate with forms, but we've kind of diverged pretty far from the form mentality here. The form, the data capture is only a very small piece of it now. In this case, we're doing PDF exports. We're exporting to an alarm customer management system, an alarm monitoring system, also a separate download portal for our internal reviews as needed, or internal emailing to customers if need be. And oh yeah, those other forms, right? The more standardized forms, like the capital improvement that a specific state requires, those are more standard for sure, but now it's all still part of the same application that's put together. So ultimately, we bundled something that is well more than that order entry form. And then if that wasn't if that wasn't all, there's this other functionality. Maybe we don't want to even use that form for the final estimations. Maybe we want to look at how a whole bunch of different estimates might look. So they're not really order entries in that case. It's really just an estimation. So what we ended up working out was the ability to essentially checkpoint any configuration of the process. And then down the road, there's some thought about even syncing these common case checkpoints across multiple users, right? So what we can see is that we've diverged quite a bit from what looked like very much a forms process in the start. We probably, everybody on the phone here probably built something in some level of complexity similar to this, and we might have thought of it as being a forms application. Certainly there's data capture associated with forms in it, but we really need to be thinking about the whole process that it's replaced. In this case, it's replaced that whole order entry process basically from start to finish. We have our sales reps go out into the field, they do the order entry, maybe they do estimation as well. They ultimately produce a contract that goes through approval and so on, and we're able to solve that problem. One other quick example that we'll go through here, and then maybe we'll open it up for some questions and comments there, is along the lines of an dependency. So this one seems simple. We've got a number of rows, what you might see in a lobby, for instance, of a building. In this case, for specific courses or groups that we're administrating. And we say, hey, that looks a lot like a form. But it turns out even here there's complexity. We've got multiple programs and classes, each of which runs multiple classes a day. There's a schedule that we have to interact with of who attends each class. We have to record the time in and out of course. That's what you'd expect with any kind of form like this, but also the participation, and there's some rules around that level of validation. And then we have a whole group of unscheduled students that might be able to attend as well, so we need to handle them as well if they walk into one of our classes. So ultimately, we built a set of forms around this, and I'm going to go through a couple of these bullets here. There's some complex rules, real-time data between the forms, and so on. But ultimately, it does look like a form again, but we are applying essentially what amounts to a mobile application as well here. Certainly, this looks like a form. This probably doesn't, and this is an equivalent dashboard here. So what lessons did we learn? Again, I will contend that forms in their own context don't necessarily exist in the mobile world. They are a good component. They're certainly a component of a good mobile app, and also that forms mean something different to everyone involved. Don't force an app to a forms UI if you don't have to. Certainly, it doesn't have to look like a standard form. UI back and forth with customers is certainly tedious. If you provide a design tool to your customers, they might be able to do a bunch of this themselves, but that's not always an option. Certainly, sometimes it's more around the professional service engagement. A multi-row UI in forms can certainly be challenging, but it's certainly better handled in apps. And then know your process. This means we might be defining the process with our customers. And then lastly, we needed a platform to build on top of that is not explicitly forms. We want to we wanted to retain forms UI for a fast prototype, but we want to also otherwise allow for more native development on the mobile devices that people might expect. We needed a better answer to data replication, and I already talked through that, and we certainly have answered that. Workflow needs to encompass more than passing forms around for approval, so we work to enable that. And then a real-time communication channel with a server for backend is useful, and even in offline-centric apps. Certainly, we might be doing the vast majority of our data capture offline, but then ultimately we might need a server to do something challenging for us as far as a workflow or as far as a data lookup goes. And that is, and we are working to incorporate all this into our upcoming Forms product and our upcoming Enterprise Applications product, and you've seen some of that already. But at this point, I think what would be useful is to maybe allow a bit of a discussion and questions around what we've gone through here at this point. So, Gautam, I think you were going to say a couple words at this point.
Sure, Chris, thank you. Can you hear me okay, Chris?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for going through that. I think it's pretty educational to understand where the boundary kind of comes between the forms and the app world, because like you were saying, a lot of forms are really apps masquerading as forms. Now, I'll invite folks to chat questions to us on the chat window. Remember, you can access that by simply scrolling up to the top of your screen and clicking on chat. In the meantime, Chris, I've got a couple of questions to start out for you. And there's questions, maybe the first one I'll start with is, have you noticed any type of affiliation with people picking certain devices and apps being a better fit than forms? Or is that an irrelevant question? You know, devices have nothing to do with whether someone should pick forms or apps.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say the devices are relevant when saying it's a form or an app, but devices certainly are relevant in picking the right one to use in your organization. You know, in our world, in using our software, you can build an app or a form on a Windows device, an iOS device, an Android device, and certainly there's great tablet offerings in all of those at this point. What I would suggest is that if it fits your ecosystem or perhaps your customer's ecosystem already, that is a good reason to lean towards the platform. If everybody's got a Windows device, a Windows laptop, and now they want to replace it, but still got some back-end, some other maybe legacy software that they need to run on it, that might be a very good reason to run a Windows device, even if the initial cost might be a little bit higher. If you're bringing something out to a customer where there might, kind of more of a consumer focus, where they might be more familiar with an iPad or something like that, that might make the correct that might be the correct platform decision. But ultimately, you know, be it a form or an app, I think they both work well. Certainly, you have a lot of flexibility on any of those platforms, and you're able to tailor it to what the customer needs, regardless of which platform ultimately gets chosen. Although I will say, as part of that process discovery, make device selection part of what you're working with on the customer, so that makes sure that you pick the right platform.
Thanks, Chris. We've got a couple of other questions coming up. I'll read them out to you. And folks, feel free to use the chat window and put your questions in the queue. We'll read them up as they come. So, Chris, there's a question here that's about, can you print a completed form from a handheld device to a Zebra RW420 printer to leave behind with the customer at the time of completion? Sure.
So I'm not admittedly completely familiar with that printer, but the general answer to that is yes. There are good mobile printing solutions out there from a variety of companies. Specific to our software, on the Windows side, we can interface with any kind of printer that can be connected up to the Windows device. On iOS, if it's an AirPrint printer, we can print to those devices as well. And we've got a solution coming ultimately in the Android world, but right now on iOS or Windows, as long as it's a printer that can be accessed by that device, then yes, certainly you could do that and leave it with your customer at the time of capture.
And to add to that, Chris, I find it ironic that these days, even though we're helping customers go paperless and realize all the efficiencies from that, the regulations sometimes require that our customers leave behind paper copies with their customers.
Yeah,
so we live in a world.
Think about it. You know, on the paper process, I might just have, and this is certainly dated perhaps, but a carbon copy of it, right, that I leave with the customer, and they feel very comfortable with that. But yeah, the mobile printing solutions certainly are an answer there. So it makes sense. You know, even though I've seen the person key in all the information on their mobile device, I just want to make sure that it's accurate at the time that they leave my residence or my business.
Thank you. Another question that's come up is, can you map information from a 2D barcode to specific fields on a form?
Yeah, absolutely. So on all of our platforms, first in our forms capture, and certainly if you're building against our apps platform, do support barcode capture. And 2D barcodes, typically the way they work is they have some sort of delimiter in the data somewhere. So in other words, you might have gone to a trade show or something that's got a badge on it and it's got a 2D barcode, and usually they'll say that we'll put like a pipe or a caret or something between first name and last name and company and so on and so forth. So the answer is yeah. As long as you know what the format of your 2D barcode looks like when you're designing the form or the app, you can absolutely map from that barcode capture into other fields.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and take one of the questions that's still in the queue, which is, do you support user authentication in order to use the form? And I'll go ahead and say the answer is yes. Our system is tightly controlled for security. Everybody logs into a device, into a specific users, and we control and track in an audit trail too, who is logged in at what time, when they start a form, when they finish the form. All of those things are tracked and appropriately protected. And that's an important thing to keep in mind when you move from a paper world to a paperless world, is keeping electronic audit trails of all that information and making sure only the right users have access to the right information. Chris, let me put another question to you, which came in the queue. What is the breakdown of the devices for our customers? Meaning, do you have the most volume on iOS or Android or Windows, etc.?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say right now we have more volume on Windows than on iOS or Android, but in the and part of that is just because those platforms have existed for longer. Even if they haven't been as necessarily as sleek as they are now, the tablet concept has existed in Windows since like 2002, and we've been right there with available there. So for the customers that adopted early and are continuing their mobility journey, the answer is probably not really changing platforms. In the more recent adopters, I would say that we see somewhere around a 50-50 mix between Windows and not Windows, iOS having more traction than Android at this point. But again, it sort of depends on what the existing customer ecosystem looks like to start with.
Thank you. Another question that's come in, do you offer handwriting as part of completing a form or keyboard only? And maybe you can kind of address input options, generally speaking, related to this question.
Yeah, thanks for that one. I actually had that one privately here too, and I was going to make sure that we got to it. So thanks for the person who submitted that one. So generally on the input side of things, we strive to make our forms and our apps usable with whatever kind of input you have. So different sorts of devices sort of lend themselves to different input methodologies. The iOS and Android devices tend to be, certain exceptions on Android side, tend to be touch devices or touch-centric devices. So in that case, we are seeing a lot more fields that are filled out via tapping on the field, bring up the on-screen virtual keyboard and enter into there, tap checkboxes, tap buttons, that sort of thing. Certainly still for signature fields, you can use your finger or perhaps one of the back end of a pen styluses if you have one of those, or separate stylus that you might have bought for signature field or for annotating on images, that sort of thing. As far as specifically to handwriting recognition goes, usually that's best done on devices that offer an active digitizer. Mostly you see this on the Windows devices like Surface Pro and certain Dell devices and that sort of thing, where there's actually two separate digitizers, a touch digitizer and an active digitizer. That second one, that active one, interacts with a pen that is a much higher resolution than the touch is. And in that case, certainly handwriting recognition can be a great part of what is usually referred to as pen computing. One recent justification for that I heard was from an organization that is probably going down the Windows side and does inspections, is that people's hands are really dirty when they're out there in the field, and though they could use touch because the devices offer that, they would actually get the devices extremely dirty very quickly, so they prefer to use a pen input there. Regardless of what your input choice is, in our apps on the platforms, we do support the different methodologies, and we strive to just quote-unquote do it right. In other words, your pen does what a pen should do, your finger does what a finger should do, and if you're using a mouse and keyboard on, say, a laptop or desktop, that works as well. So the answer is it's a bit platform dependent and certainly definitely process dependent, but all those are good different input methodologies for filling out forms and for apps.
And Chris, maybe I'll jump in here and also add that we're when we think about input options and input methodologies, we're not just talking about touch and handwriting and keyboarding. There's some other options too, like voice, for instance. And I know a lot of you are probably familiar with using Siri and Google Voice and all that kind of stuff, and voice is becoming more prevalent. You know, we've teamed up with some third-party software companies to do some voice recognition and voice commands on some of these forms and apps and things. So that's something else to keep in mind, is as the future rolls up, you know, we'll see more and more use of voice and other input methodologies too. So I'm going to skip a couple of questions and get back to some of these questioners privately. There's some questions specific to our product and platform that I will get back and make sure we answer those with the appropriate people. There's a general question about whether we support enterprise mobility management solutions, Chris, and if so, which ones? And I assume the questioner is referring to MDM solutions, to other kinds of mobility managed solutions like Intune, perhaps. Maybe you can take that.
Yeah, sure. The general answer to that is yes. We don't provide our own MDM, but we can certainly run under other MDMs that are out there. Intune is one that perhaps we've done the most research on. We actually have a internal research project going on right now to explore some of the other ones like Zendesk and a couple flew out of my mind as I was saying that. But thus far, we haven't seen any challenges in using those in conjunction with our software, either on the apps or on the form side.
Thank you. And there's another question about telling the questioner about our integration with SharePoint and InfoPath forms. Do they play nicely together? And how does our system work with SharePoint? I'll make a quick comment on this, which is, you know, yeah, a lot of our customers end up having a lot of Microsoft technology, including Microsoft SharePoint, and our system does interact and integrate very nicely with it. InfoPath, for those of you that do or don't know, is a forms tool that comes with SharePoint, and it's included with the SharePoint Enterprise license. So a lot of customers will try to develop and deploy their mobile solution in InfoPath. What they found is it's not as optimized for the mobile experience. If you're sitting at a desk using these forms in just a desktop context, it works fine. In the mobile use case, it doesn't tend to work as well. It's not as optimized for that. So we've seen some failure rates with customers going down the path. Incidentally, Microsoft has also announced end-of-life support for InfoPath, which is being discontinued as a product line. And so we're seeing some customers migrate and having discussions with us about alternatives going forward there. And so certainly happy to talk about SharePoint integration in more detail to the questioner. We'll follow up with you on that. There's another question here, Chris, for you. One of our existing customers has deployed a mobile form and has it about to go live. Apart from, do they need any additional software or infrastructure above or beyond what they already have in place to make use of everything that's been presented today? So I think if I paraphrase that, the question is sort of getting at, do they need to have anything new if they've already got MyForm software, if they've already got products from us, to take advantage of some of the things you've talked about today?
Yeah, so I think if they're asking the context of our own software offering, then the answer to that is we are continuously improving our product line. That's true across all of our different operating system offerings, you know, iOS, Android, Windows. So some of what I've talked to and what we've talked about with data replication and some of the input methodologies and so on are about to be released in our version 10 software. That said, our previous releases are very full-featured, and you know, if they are meeting the needs of the customer, then no, there's nothing really new necessarily has to be deployed. As the forms solution grows and perhaps more forms get added to it or more needs occur inside the current process, and yeah, along the lines of our data replication server and that sort of thing, and future versions of MyForms and My Enterprise app, then yeah, there'll be some additional deployments there. But if they're an existing customer with my corporation, we'll certainly be glad to work with that partner or that customer to go ahead and help them out with that. Great,
thank you. Another question was about what platforms does our software run on, and I think we've covered that, but I'll sort of reiterate. We support Windows, iOS, Android, HTML5, and Chris, maybe you can take a moment or two to talk to folks about the digital pen option that we support, just so they're aware from the context of different device choices and in today's BYOD world and CYOD and all the other terms we've heard. Maybe you can just speak about that for a moment or two.
Yeah, sure. So for those who might not be familiar with the digital pen, it's a technology where the logic of the actual forms capture, at least the inking capture, is done within a pen that fits in the size of your hand. It's a little bigger than a normal pen, but it's still pretty small. The way it actually works is that there is a light dot pattern printed on itself. This is still done with normal printers, regular paper, standard paper, and then the pen is able to determine not just where it is on that page, but also what unique ID that page has. You might have seen something like this if you've got a LiveScribe pen out there for taking notes, or certain children's devices use a similar technology to indicate where you are in a book and that sort of thing. In the enterprise side, you're able to print your own pattern on top of your own forms, and then there's an enterprise pen that goes with that. So we support that, have done so since I believe it was 2002 or 2003. Basically, what you're doing in this case is really kind of guaranteeing yourself a paper record. Taught towards printing in the past, but if you do this, if you print a dot pattern on top of a form and then do the digital pen capture, you can actually leave the source form itself there on site rather than having to print something. Then the ink that was captured is in that pen. You either use a Bluetooth connection or a dock with that to transmit it up to either a Windows client device or to my form server or my enterprise app server itself. And we're able to interpret that inbound ink and do handwriting recognition on it, do recognition of checkboxes or whatever else might be checked. Certainly, it's a solution that applies in some very specific use cases. Certainly, very rough environmental conditions is one place, or where I might not be able to carry a tablet either for safety reasons or because my hands are full and maybe it's too big. And certainly can be used to fill that kind of gap, and obviously provides some level of flexibility there. The difficulty with it is usually that you can't necessarily do real-time validations on it, but certainly it could be part of your workflow is where you have a person fill it out and then eventually route back either to that same person or to somebody else to perform some validation on the data from there. But it's certainly definitely a unique and flexible option for when your environmental conditions require that, or maybe your customer source data requires that.
Yes, I like to call it the Harry Potter pen or James Bond pen, depending on what genre you're more into there. It's a pretty interesting option for a lot of customers. So let's go ahead and wrap up. I know we're coming to the end of our hour. Hopefully the discussion today has helped you all understand a little bit about how we see a discussion between what is a forms solution, what is an app solution. We haven't talked a whole lot about our new My Enterprise Apps middleware platform that's coming out. I'll just say a word or two about it. So if you decide what is appropriate for you as an app solution, a mobile app solution, you might then be in the business of, well, how do you build that solution? There's certainly a lot of ways you can do that, and Chris, maybe you can wrap up here with that, and we're coming to the end of our hour. So we'll sort of wrap up there and ask people that we can follow up with them with more details about it, and hopefully you've gleaned some wisdom today about what might be a simplistic form solution or a complex form solution, or even trending into an app solution here.
Yeah, sure. And as you said, we're welcome further discussion with anybody offline later. Broadly, our solution, My Enterprise Apps, which will be released in the near future here, is a app middleware that allows you to take advantage of a lot of the services that our server and wrappers around that we put together in solutions for our direct customers and for our partners. We found that we were building a lot of the same things many times, and we wanted to try to commoditize that so that it was easier to have a base platform to build things on top of. So what you're able to do is build an app in whatever technology you'd like it to be it Xcode for iOS or Java for Android, for Visual Studio and .NET for Windows, or even a true web app that is a combo HTML5, CSS, JavaScript app. You're able to deploy what we call an app package to our application server that allows authorization and authentication around these apps. And then there's a connectivity through a .NET layer that events in the app's lifecycle can trigger. And this is where you can build in your export logic to pretty much anything that's got a connector. Certainly, I've got 4 such examples here, but it's really anything that's got an API or an open interface that you might be able to talk with. And what we try to do is take some of the time away from building everything from scratch. If you had to start and you were just looking at building a mobile app from scratch and you said, hey, let me just do everything myself, you would have to build a lot of these same pieces. So we're trying to save that time for IT organizations to build mobile apps and build on top of our platform. So this is very high level. Like I said, we can discuss further if anybody who's interested in another time. But this is where we see a lot of our own direct solutions going, and certainly probably we'll see some of our partners and our direct customers implement on their own as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up in the interest of time. Folks, we will send you a recording of the WebEx session and make the slide decks available as well upon request, and we'll certainly follow up with you to see if we can help you continue the discussion about what's right for you and how to improve on your solutions so we can all realize the benefits of mobility. So, Chris, thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Let's leave our contact info up on the screen for a second, Chris, so people have access to that. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and all the best for the rest of your day.
Yep, thank you, Gautam.